In Jamaica, a group of Christian media workers have come out urging the government not to dispense with the long-held tradition of devotion in public schools. The Education Ministry has not said it plans to cut devotion from school activities, but an incident at the Oberlin High has brought the issue of devotion into sharp focus, and the government has made its stance clear. The Education Minister, Fayval, is here to articulate what the government's response to this issue is, along with tackling other matters concerning the provision of resources to school, violence in schools, and of course that thorny issue of the composition of school boards. School boards are usually the preserve for the politically connected, the politically aligned, and Minister Williams says that has to change. It has to be a composition of persons who have the school's best interest at heart and are focused on serving. Minister Williams, welcome to the conversation. Welcome back.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Excellent, yes. Excellent. It's my pleasure. Let's start with the issue of the devotion, because we all saw the video clip circulating about Oberlin, and I was dumbstruck as to what was happening. Your ministry issued a statement on the matter rather swiftly, and then not long after, the group of Christian media workers came out to say, oh, the government ought not to trouble or trifle with this issue of with the practice of devotion. It ought to remain in schools. We don't want Christian values to be eroded. It was a far reach from them, but that's what they said in essence. The ministry's response to the Oberlin issue and the broader policy where devotion is concerned. I wanted to articulate that for me.
All right. So, George, as you know, Jamaica is a religious country. Mm-hmm. There's been religion in our schools for probably centuries.
Yes.
Many of our schools came out of the efforts of churches. And so we've all accepted that as a nation, but we are in 2022 now, and as you mentioned, the incidents at Oberlin High School brought into sharp focus what can happen in some of these devotions in school. So as a ministry, we have to be responsible in terms of ensuring that, well, first of all, let me assure Jamaicans that devotions will continue in school. We've never said they will not continue. Devotions will continue in school. But I believe it's prudent for us to look at some protocols around devotion. We have protocols in our schools about everything we do in school.
Yes.
And I think it is wise of us as well to look at it just to ensure that at the school level you understand who is coming in, who is conducting devotions and so on. And I don't think that's a far stretch. I don't think it's overreach by the ministry. If you look at our churches, no random person can show up in church and say, I've got a word for the congregation.
Yes.
That pastor controls what happens in that church.
Yes.
Because he needs to know that whoever is coming in is aligned with the philosophy of that church.
Correct.
So in schools, we need to ensure at the school level, the board needs to know who's coming in, who's interacting with the students, who's performing devotions and so on. That's what we're saying.
All right, but what you said deals with external parties, where internal publics, the internal publics of the school, administrators, teachers even, who say, they've been touched by the Spirit and they want to perhaps even minister to the students at devotion. Is it that once you're inside the school ecosystem, it's anything goes, anybody can lead devotion, or are there protocols attendant to that as well?
But again, within the schools,
yes.
You do have leadership in the school, and the leadership should understand the philosophy of even people internally to come in, to be there to lead devotions, right? If you look across on the education side, we ensure that we have persons who have the expertise in different subject areas to teach. We don't just grab anyone and say,
right.
You go ahead. Why not that as well in terms of religion? Religious education is taught in many schools, and you wouldn't necessarily just pick someone and say, go and teach religious education, right? So just getting some protocols around it so that there's awareness about what philosophy is being exposed in schools, and that to remember that this is school, We don't want persons to be trying to convert students to a particular religion,
Yes.
expose them to the different religions so that there's an awareness. But proselytizing and so on should not be happening in our schools.
Who has charge of enforcing those protocols? Is it that devotion, a checklist has to be taken, that the guidance council, perhaps a senior teacher, perhaps the principal, vice principal has charge of saying,
so
these persons can administer?
We're not there yet.
Yeah.
It's the development of those protocols, and I know at least a couple of organizations have reached out to say that they would like to be part of this consultation, and of course, we will allow persons before we finalize anything, because we understand the importance of religion to Jamaicans. As I said, it's been a tradition in our schools and something that we want to continue. But we also have to be mindful that there are some religions that could produce the results that we saw at Oberlin High School.
Beyond Oberlin, has there been, in your time as education minister, any complaint from any court or any parent or group of concerned parents about how devotion is administered, or whether or not devotion ought to be administered, or a situation where he or she, the parent, feels or they feel that devotion ought to be administered but has not been in a particular school?
Well, given this recent situation at Oberlin, persons have started to come forward. And as a for instance, I can tell you that there are adults now who were children then going to certain schools, and they've indicated that they used to deliberately be late for devotion because of what was happening in that particular devotion. So because this is on the table now, we're seeing persons say, oh yes, this was happening when I was going to school and so on. I think it's time for a conversation around it, given that this has come forward, and we would not be a responsible ministry if we remain silent on this, even to begin that conversation.
You know very well, being in government, the criticism that often attends to these things. Oh, I wasn't consulted. That's one. And then the second one is that, so I was not consulted more often in two forms. One, that I wasn't spoken to or listened to any at all. Or the other one is people say they weren't consulted when they were listened to, but what they suggested wasn't acted upon. They don't find it in any recommendations, and they say, well, we weren't consulted. In terms of the groups that the ministry will consult in informing this policy, who are some of those that you will definitely be encouraging to sit at the table with you?
Well, I know that the Ecumenical Church has written to say we want to be at the table, and of course I've written back to them to say you will be included. Other religions will be written to say this is the date, or these are the dates for the meeting. There are others who've called me as well to say they would like to be part of this conversation.
And Teachers Association as well?
Of course,
yes.
of course, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The broader issue of the conduct in schools, Minister Williams, especially as it regards violence. I mean, we've had several unfortunate incidents over, well, too many, I say several, too many, loss of lives in some instances. Maybe it's because of football, but I remember the young boy Hall from William Knibb Memorial High School who was stabbed and killed on the compound. And that's not the only case. But people are complaining that the enforcement of discipline on the schools, in schools, is hiram scarum, and there's not a clear policy for people, for school managers to follow, and that the security in schools is something that has left a lot to be desired, and that PALS, Peace and Love in Schools, that program has lost steam. I want you to speak to that for me, those issues.
Okay, so over the last 2 years or so, schools were closed, right? Children were at home. A lot of them were, when they were at home, they were operating independently, right? So we've seen where we're back into the face-to-face environment. We are seeing increase in the incidence of violence in schools. And so now we have to reactivate all those things that we used to do, right? So you've seen us reactivated the metal detectors, whether it's handheld or scanning. Yes. We've reactivated searches. And actually, our manual, we had to put it out again to remind our school leaders that here's laid out the protocols for you to follow. It's a decent sized manual that we're saying to everybody, please read and follow these guidelines. We are seeing a greater need for there to be security in our schools at the gate, trained security personnel. We are seeing a greater demand for fencing around our schools to prevent persons from just coming on at random. We are seeing a number of things in response to the violence in our school. There's a call for more deans of discipline in our schools, especially our high schools. There's a call for more guidance counselors in our schools to deal with this. So it's an issue that up to now, based on the different situations that we're seeing, we might not have resourced as properly as we should have. Because, school is school, and these are children. And over the decades, we've had a high level of respect for schools, for teachers in those schools. Schools, if you look at where they're located within communities. They didn't necessarily have fencing around them because persons respected the property of schools.
And there was really no need to fence up a school back
exactly,
in the Yes,
like a school in rural Jamaica. No need whatsoever. Because the community protected the school. They protected the things that are in the school. But we seem to have lost that, just in a serious way. I recently went to a corporate area school, and they showed us a picture of a beautifully decked out lab that they had. And then the next picture, they go, this is what it looks like now. Everything has been stolen. You know what I mean? There's no respect for schools. So when people ask about what are we doing, what are the things we're putting in school, this is new territory that we're in right now. New territory. We're realizing that the modesty with which we used to operate in our schools is requiring us now to go harder, bringing in those policing kinds of strategies into our schools. And for me, that's really disheartening.
Is it that, as we head up to the break, is it that you found, and you and your team and the educators in the schools have found, is it that children these days, because of the circumstances, are way more aggressive than students before? Or is it a case that the controls that exist within the schools to curb deviant behavior, that these controls are outdated? Which is it?
George, sometimes when we look back, we call them the good old days. Our memories tend to have only the good things that used to happen. But I still have to look back, and in those days, parents were more involved in schools. I can think of rural schools where when the principal calls a PTA meeting, every parent turned out because they wanted to know what was happening at the school. They had a lot of respect for the principal, a lot of respect for the teachers. We're seeing an erosion in that now, and it suggests we have to do a lot of training of our parents, right? To say, come on, parents, you're an important stakeholder in this, right? You have responsibility to come to PTA meetings, to come to teacher-student sessions. When they're called. You have a responsibility to ensure that your child is showing up in uniform that is within guidelines of the school, and showing up on time, and all of those. We find that we have to be teaching these things. We have to be reminding parents of these things. And so when they don't happen, it places a burden on the schools, on the teachers, to act, to correct these things. And it's in correcting these things that you find we're having these situations in school.
All right, let's take the break now. The Minister of Education in Jamaica, Fayval Williams, is saying it's almost as if the community and parents and guardians have abandoned the development of children and students to the school alone, the school under pressure struggling because it's not a task the school ought to be carrying out on its own. More on the conversation after this. Back with us on the conversation, talking matters concerning education in Jamaica with the woman in charge of the Education Ministry, Fayval Williams. Minister, there was a suggestion made that perhaps the Education Ministry could assist itself by looking to deploy, well, you spoke about people calling for an increase in the number of guidance counselors and deans of discipline in school. Fine. But they said that the ministry could assist itself by perhaps going across its various regions, clustering a few schools, and assigning professional psychologists, professional behaviorists to these schools to help unravel and deal with some of the issues facing students that then translates into the violent behavior that we've seen exploded in this COVID period. Where do you stand on that?
We are at a better position than that. We have these deans of discipline and guidance counselors in the school, in our high schools in particular. So yes, we do have clusters of schools, the QEC cluster, but we've put the guidance counselors and the deans of discipline in the schools.
But the only thing is this, because I did make that point in mitigation. They said, well, George, the fact of the matter is that a behaviorist, a psychologist, perhaps has skills at an advanced level beyond that which the deans and the guidance counselors possess.
Right. So what we have layered on to that, so just in terms of thinking about the layers, right? The first line of, the first responder, if you will, is the teacher in the classroom.
Yes.
Teacher knows the students. They can sense a change in behavior of a student and so forth. If a child is acting up in the classroom, the teacher can refer that child to the guidance counselor. So let's say the guidance counselor feels he or she has done all that he or she can do. We do have professionals to whom this child can be referred. We have professionals that we pay on a per hour, depending on the session, to whom this child can be referred. And we're even going a step further now. The program has not been rolled out just yet. We are still in the planning phase, but we would like for the child and the parents to do the session, a minimum of 10 sessions, to see if they can get through, get a breakthrough in terms of the issues. So we understand the need that's there, and we're laying on top of what we have these professionals. Yeah.
Perhaps it's a question that is perhaps best placed to the JTA, the main teachers lobby in Jamaica. But I'll put it to you as a person in charge of education in the country. Do you get the sense that teachers, in the face of heightened aggression from the students in this COVID period, that the teachers have retreated? And if you get the sense that the teachers have retreated, can we afford for our teachers to retreat?
We cannot afford for our teachers to retreat. We have to ensure that we give them skills that will allow them to manage in those situations in which they feel the behavior is aggressive, right? So, and we, at the same time, we have to teach our children as well how they get out of aggressive situations without losing their sense of self, and how do they deal with the other students who are standing around cheering them on as well. These are learned behavior that you can be taught how to handle these situations. We obviously don't want our children to bring weapons into school. We don't want them to fight. We want them to report things to the teacher. We want the teacher to be able to escalate things. But it is it is a problem that seems to be growing, and one for which we have to scale up our efforts in order to bring normality to the situation. Violence is a learned behavior. The experts say that. If you're in a home in which there's violence on you, or you're witnessing it on other people, chances are you're going to absorb that, and that's going to become a part of your reaction to things that happen to you in life. So everything, George, points back to the home and how our children are grown. Remember, the parents are the first teachers of the students. And if they're not in a loving situation, they can't necessarily, show love and peacefulness and all of the qualities that we want when they are interacting with other students. We're finding that the slightest thing triggers our students, and they go first to violence rather than having a conversation. So in order to have a conversation, though, you have to be taught to have a conversation. You have to have faith and trust that this conversation will lead to the outcome that you want. So those are the things that we're going to have to just keep adding to our menu of options to be in our schools, and hopefully they will help in the situation.
Between this point and the end of this fiscal year, just tell me the main policy applications that the ministry is working on to have implemented before this fiscal year is done to assist with conflict resolution, the upskilling of teachers to handle violent students, and to create an environment where parents are encouraged and perhaps even incentivized to come in, sit with their child, submit themselves to the courses that you mentioned just now, and to try to be a part of the solution between now and May 30th.
Right, so
March,
between
yes.
now, right, so
March,
we just recently launched a program called Just Meds It. It's a popular slogan, which means, think about it before you act. That is a year-long campaign that we will be taking into schools to engage our students. It's a Just Meds It, let's End Violence in School campaign, to engage them in a way that they probably have not been engaged before, to let them understand that violence is not the only reaction that's available to them. We're also working with the Ministry of Justice, and this is happening right now, to take restorative justice practices into schools. And I've been to a few of the schools in which these sessions are held with children. And there's a particular primary school that I went to, and I was blown away at the end of 2 days. When you ask the children what they have learned, they really learn the practice in those days. Obviously, we want the parents to be involved, because when they go back home, we want them to have support from the parents in terms of these practices. We want parents to understand them as well. We also have the National Parenting Support Commission. They've been around for some time now, working with parents. They do have a small army of volunteers. They have a hotline that parents can call. They have counselors on those hotlines to speak with parents who are probably going through issues. We also have the CPFSA, Child Protection and Family Services Agency, even though they are the safety net for issues of abuse and so on, but they do have some parenting resources and support as well that they provide to families. So these are our major initiatives that are there, in addition to obviously the prevention ones, the metal detector, the scanners or the walkthroughs, the searches and so on, because we have to prevent implements from coming into schools, even though we've seen situations where school, as Kingston Technical, it does searches, it has metal detectors, but still there was a situation, an awful situation with the killing of another student.
Yeah. All right. If you look at the controversial issue, and, I remember when we were changing from common entrance to GSAT, then from GSAT to PEP, and those things always had controversy because people don't like change and so forth. Yeah. But Minister, the sixth form pathways program, I've looked at it myself, And I'm saying, you know, well, why is this so controversial? What is materially wrong with it? But a lot of sensible people who I have tremendous respect for, and I'm sure you do as well, have found fault with it and have criticized it as the worst thing ever dreamed up or dreamt up and implemented by any education ministry in the history of Jamaica. That's
Why?
6-4. I don't. So I'm
Okay,
asking you to defend
George,
that program. Yes.
So George, if you look at the history of education in Jamaica, we've practiced exclusion in education. Think about the days of common entrance, right? If you didn't pass common entrance in primary school, a high school was not in your future.
Yes.
There came a time when somebody stood up and said, no, we're not going to continue with this. All of our children who leave primary school will have a place in high school. Mm-hmm. Was the situation perfect then? No. There are schools that had to double up and become shift schools.
My school had 3 shifts.
Exactly.
Yes.
But we made it work because we saw the importance of having children get more education, right? It would have been great if we're here in 2022 and all those students who graduate at grade 11 attained a high level, right, mm-hmm. of education. But it is not so. So what do? Do you continue with that situation, or you find some solution while you're going back and trying to fix the issues that are there?
Yes.
Remember, the students who graduated from grade 11 last year, they're here now, mm-hmm. right? They are without CXC, or a few CXC, they're without skills. Mm-hmm. What do? Do you continue to send them out, to send them home? Mm-hmm. To do what? To find a training program, maybe? Mm-hmm. What do you do? These are 16, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, maybe 16. Let's say they're a 16-year-old when they get to grade mm-hmm. 11. Who's likely to hire a 16-year-old mm-hmm. in the workplace? Mm-hmm. And tertiary is not yet in their future, right. because they don't have that 5 CXC with maths and English, yes. right? So in looking at the situation, we had to create opportunities for these students to get more education. Yes. And so the Sixth Form Pathways program was designed. I mean, to be honest with you, it was designed before I got there. Mm. It was actually launched before I got there. Mm-hmm. But I understand that at that time you had the objection, and so the ministry pulled back. Yes. And for me, that was not the right course of action, yes. because when I looked at the program, I could see the benefits of it. Mm-hmm. And as you look across the world at how education is changing, mm-hmm. they too are talking about different pathways for students, yes. in recognition that not everyone is going to be the straight academic focus. There's TVET there that we've ignored, mm-hmm. right? The TVET, which is the technical vocational education, yes. ought to be on the same plane as the traditional academics. Yes. And we're trying to do that. We're trying to bring that back. We're trying to give it we're trying to create the awareness in Jamaica that one path is not the only path. Yes. There are other paths to education.
And you're saying that the sixth form pathways is here to stay.
It is here to stay. George, the proof of that is in the number of students who signed up, yes. for the program. Yes. I mean, absolutely, we ought to be celebrating, yes. our students.
Yes. Let's take the break. This is The Conversation here on CEEN TV. Back with more after these. Back with us on The Conversation, my guest is the Minister of Education in Jamaica, Fayval Williams. Minister, we were talking about the Sixth Form Pathways program before the break, which of course is designed to keep students in secondary school, at the secondary school level, for a bit longer, and looking to equalize opportunities for all beyond that point. Traditionally in Jamaica, and I'm suspecting in many parts of the Caribbean, sixth form was an elite undertaking. It was for the brightest of the brightest who had the subjects who could go on to upper six, to lower six, upper six, and then transition straight into a tertiary situation. In some schools, if you didn't matriculate to sixth form, it suggested that you weren't as bright as the other people who went there. And of course, because it was elitist, because in real terms it was, because it was elitist, the numbers weren't high because, of course, elite means the best of the very best. Under the sixth form pathways program, I wanted to give me an idea of the number of people who've signed up and the number of people who would have been in sixth form traditionally versus who are in the sixth form pathways program.
Right, so in the traditional program, maybe 6,000 students would have signed up. At the last check, before the beginning of the school year, we had about 17,000 students who signed up, across all three pathways.
Almost 300% more.
For this program, right? So listen to this now, George. If we continue on this pathway, on this pathway, if we continue in the way that we were with only the traditional sixth form program, there is no way that we would be able to expand tertiary. Because that's it. That's it's the 6,000 students who then go on to tertiary.
Yes.
But every day we wake up and we bemoan the fact that when we look at our population, a large percentage of the working population, they're without certification, they're without tertiary education.
Yes.
How do you open up opportunities so that we can expand tertiary? You have to give those children who get to grade 11 and they can't scale that hurdle that you put in place, you have to give them other opportunities. And of course, yes, we have to go back and look at early childhood. We have to go back and look at primary. We have to look at what's happening in the high schools that would cause a child, after going through all those years of schooling, to get to grade 11 and not able to achieve at a satisfactory level. We have to go back and look at all that.
Yes.
But in the meantime, you have these children here now.
Yes.
They are 16 years old now.
Yes.
So you have to provide this opportunity for them.
So at this point, when you look at the education pyramid, I'm going to call it now, where do you see the gravest weakness in Jamaica?
Well, in our primary schools, because that's the foundation. Yes, there's an early childhood sector, so children are there until about age 6. And we have to ensure that when those children come into our primary schools, they're of the right mindset. But the data that we see is suggesting that the majority of our students who show up in primary schools are ready for primary schools.
How do you fix?
So what we're doing in primary schools now, that we started, traditionally you have one teacher in a class teaching all subjects.
Yes.
Right? So can you imagine? That's what you're used to. That's what I am used to.
Yes.
So if the teacher doesn't particularly like maths,
Or is weak?
oh yeah, maths, all right. Yeah.
Whole class get sheg, as we say in Jamaica.
All right, so we've started down the road with the specialist model in about a third of our primary schools. Those the ones that look most vulnerable.
Don't lose your train of thought.
Yeah.
You say a third. Is a third of the primary schools the pilot phase, or you're just expanding little by little?
It's our beginning phase.
Yeah.
We
So
look at the
stage.
data, to say, okay, which of these we need to go in now early with this. And what that means is you'll have specialist teachers, let's say mathematics, English language, and it's a teacher that knows mathematics, wants to teach mathematics, and they'll teach grade 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you can see how they can really follow the progression of students and so on. And we believe that will be a more enjoyable experience for both the teacher and the students. So we're starting out with 5 subject areas: maths, English, I think, information technology, and I forgot the other 2, but there are 5 subject areas that we're starting
And those
with.
3 are crucial: IT, math, English, fundamental to everything else.
Yeah.
And this program started when?
In September. In a meaningful way. It was in certain schools in the last school year, but remember we've lost like 2 years of school.
And that's where I want to go, because a lot has been said about what your ministry did during we can call it the lost years, because for many people it really were the lost years, and re-engaging students. And the criticism was that there was nothing announced by the ministry to suggest that the ministry was sending agents out into the communities, into the rural parishes especially, to go and find the children who weren't turning up for school. What was it doing about that to re-engage? And I want to put that
so
to
during
you.
the pandemic,
Yes.
there was Herculean efforts, in my estimation, on the part of the ministry to have our children remain engaged with education. So you saw us out there just immediately getting devices into the hands of our students. We did a number of things. We were able to pivot in a way that I don't believe Jamaicans understand to the online world. The platform was available to all our students. I mean, all our students now have email addresses coming out of the pandemic because we needed to create that. Way more of our students now have devices, and they're more skilled in terms of technology.
More digitally literate.
Yes, and that happened because of the pandemic. We were able to put devices, maybe 200,000 devices out there into the hands of our students in quick succession to have them sign on to the virtual world and engage with their teachers.
And this 200,000 would be in addition to what the schools themselves got to their
exactly,
past student associations.
absolutely,
Yes.
and what family and friends were able to do.
Yes.
The diaspora came on in a big way, or corporate Jamaica helped as well in terms of donations, free devices into the school system from many different quarters. Over 30,000 devices came in. We even, during the pandemic, paid for the data service for teachers, just so that they would have it, so that they could engage with the students. We understood that not every student had a device, and so we also made sure that the books were available. So we said, parents, please collect books, and would you believe it? There are books that were not collected by some parents for their children. And I'm sure you saw the pictures and videos of some teachers riding their bikes or taking their own cars to go out and drop off and pick up workbooks from children. I recently went to New York to a UN meeting that was there looking at education transformation, and I had a chance to listen to other education ministers from across the world talk about how their country dealt with the pandemic and what are they doing as they're exiting the pandemic. And there was not anything that was said that we did not do in Jamaica. So I feel confident that we acted, we were proactive, we were ahead of the pandemic. And even coming out of it, we launched the Yard to Yard Find a Child initiative for us to go out into communities and make sure we bring these children back into school. During the pandemic, we had said about 120,000 children were not engaged in any of our three methodologies. They were not engaged online. We didn't find any evidence that they were in touch with the school. Teachers couldn't find them when they go out. Today, I can tell you that we are at about 4,000. Granted, when we return to the face-to-face, many of them would have come.
Right.
But we're at about 4,000. But we're also discovering now that absenteeism is a big problem. So yes, the children are coming, but when you look at their record,
the pattern,
absenteeism is a big. It's just a big issue. And if you're absent, that's going to impact what you're able to learn, right? Because every day the lessons build on each other at school. So that is the new thing now that we have to tackle. This absenteeism, bringing it to the awareness of Jamaicans, and to say that children need to be in school.
2 minutes to this break, which is the penultimate break. The last segment comes up after. But I want to start the issue of teacher migration from here, because just at the eve of the start of this new school year in September, a lot was made about how many teachers were going overseas for better opportunities. And Jamaicans, you could begrudge someone going to make a better future for themselves. That's their right. I was kind of worried with my daughter going to high school about whether or not there'd be enough teachers for her at her school, and her school is one of them which you would expect would have teachers in every subject area, and I was worrying about parents with children in other schools. What is the situation? Is the situation as dire as predicted at the start of the school year? Has it ameliorated? Has the situation moderated?
It has moderated, and let me give you the numbers, George.
Yes.
And annually, and I checked these with an embassy,
Yes.
to say how many teachers you process, you give visas to annually. And they said about 900 teachers annually we give visas to. And I didn't check all the embassies. So that's the number that we're dealing with,
Yes.
right? We have 25,000 teachers in our system. We do have on an annual basis graduates out of our teachers' colleges that come into the system. So we are managing. Yes, we expect teachers to resign, and many of them may migrate. It's not a problem, but it's something that has been managed over the years by this school system. Now that we're here in 2022, and it was broadcast around the world that the U.S. has this great need for teachers. Yes, we're going to continue to see migration, but we have to ensure that we have teachers coming out of our teachers' colleges to be able to fill into those positions that are left. Additionally, to help with this current situation, we sought and got approval from the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service for teachers who are on their long leave, because that's also was in the mix as well. There are teachers who go off on 4 months or 8 months leave annually. It happens, about 1,000 teachers or so go off. I think, it was about 1,800. And they were allowed, schools were allowed, if the teachers wanted to come back and teach during that 4 months or the 8 months, and they would be paid for that time as well, in addition to their leave benefits that they were entitled to anyways. There were a number of other initiatives that we put out into the system to allow our principals and our boards to have some flexibility in terms of hiring persons in to be able to fill the spots. We're seeing things settle down now, but that doesn't mean that we're going to become complacent on this. We have to ensure that come the next school year that we are well ahead of what is happening.
Hear you on that. We take a break, our final break here on The Conversation. Back with more with Jamaica's Education Minister after this. Back with us on The Conversation, finishing up with the Education Minister in Jamaica, Fayval Williams. I guess one of the concerns, though, about the teacher churn is that issue of the country investing in the training of a young man or young woman to enter the profession. They are here, and by the time they start finding their feet, they're going to hit their peak years as an educator, because you have peak years as a parliamentarian and peak years as a journalist, peak years in every profession. They are lured away by the greater benefits and remuneration that exists elsewhere. And I would imagine that that would be a problem, notwithstanding the point you made about the teachers' colleges providing a throughput to the school system to replace bodies. But it is when we lose the experience and the quality after having invested in them that can only retard the quality of education in a country such as Jamaica. You'd agree?
Yes, we don't want to lose our experienced teachers, because we understand that you become better with more years in the classroom. So, but can we, in our teachers' colleges, create a scenario in which the teachers coming out would have maybe, the experience, if you will, in coming into the classrooms? We're challenging our teachers' colleges to see what they can change in terms of how they're teaching students and sending them out into the system. But additionally, though, you're having students come out of our teachers' colleges more au fait with technology.
This is the technological generation after all. Digital literacy is very high.
Right,
yes.
So that's a plus coming out. But I hear you just in terms of the experience level.
Yes.
But we're hoping that as more teachers come into the system, that they're able to get up to that experience level quicker, not just by years, but just in terms of how they're practicing their craft.
Various things have been said about how the ministry could prevail upon the finance ministry to give it the resource, the space, the fiscal space to work in, whereby you could hammer out a more reasonable package for the average teacher than exists now. Is that something that the country can afford? Is that something that you are pushing for to retain more of what we train the better ones?
So, George, there is a massive effort on the way by the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service to look at public sector wages all across the board. I know that there have been many, many meetings with the Jamaica Teachers Association about our teachers. So I can't preempt that process. I know the Minister of Finance and the Public Service has spoken about it, several times, and we have to await the announcement, the numbers, the information from there, to go forward with that.
Hear you on that.
Yeah.
All right. The issue concerning where the education ministry, the motivation of the education ministry rather, as it relates to not just salaries or remuneration, but providing the kind of environment in the schools and the support system in schools for teachers to be incentivized to stay just because they're part of an institution that is being well run, that is adequately resourced, where it is to my benefit to stay within these walls. And people say, well, it might seem like a stretch, but the education ministry is responsible for allowing schools, outfitting schools with the resources to create an environment whereby even if a teacher is getting greater remuneration overseas, they are incentivized to remain here. And this is outside of the process that the Ministry of Finance and Public Service is husbanding where public sector pay is concerned. Where are you on that?
So, George, I'll be the first to admit that the infrastructure and the resources in our schools need, our infrastructure is in need of more investments.
Yes.
And the resources within our schools, especially when you look at our labs and so on within our schools, there's need for more investments. I'm happy to say that in the upcoming school year, all the computer labs at our high schools will be upgraded, outfitted with all of them. And this is an effort through e-learning. So they're doing the procurement and they will go to all our high schools in terms of labs. We want to have that same program in terms of other facilities in our schools. We've not had the level of capital investments that we should have in the infrastructure of our schools. And if you look at it by any measure, the data will tell you so. So we have to accelerate that. And since I've been there, I have been pushing to get more work done in our schools. We want, when you enter our school compound, you feel, education is happening here. We don't want you to see pop-down places.
Yes, because I've heard teachers tell me that, George, I can't try to save the world in this ramshackle place.
We want comfortable staff room for our teachers. Ideally, all of our schools should have an admin block because there are persons for whom the school is their workplace.
They spend 12, 14 hours there per day.
They should have comfortable quarters. So that is not an argument, that we're going to make against further investments at our schools. If anything, we have to accelerate the pace at which we are doing that, because we know your work environment will determine your level of satisfaction and so on. So there's, I'm not going to deny that there's a need for greater investments in terms of resources.
As the Member of Parliament for Eastern St. Andrew, and I'm not saying you do it, but I'm just saying, as an MP, you have certain people, loyalists, who you depend on to help coordinate for you on the ground to get you the votes needed on election day, to keep your seat, to keep the constituency running, because you can't take every phone call that you get, and I'm sure every MP gets a lot. You need people to connect you to people on the ground so you can get things done. Within that group are people who have certain skills, but who lack other skills, who find themselves on the boards of schools just because of their political allegiance. Now, again, I'm not saying that you put politically connected people on school boards, but I'm saying that it happens, and it has happened over time across political parties, and it has not served the country well. You have said that your ministry is on a mission to reform how people are appointed to school boards. What's the pace of that reformation process? What will it entail?
Well, I'm going to follow the model that was laid out by the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service in terms of the modernization of boards, of how boards are selected in public bodies. So you create a database to which persons can put their information who are interested in serving on school boards. You have the well laid out criteria so persons would know what skill set we're looking for. And you go through that same process of engaging these persons. You should know, George, that there is an entity at the ministry called the National Council on Education that's vested in law with the power to select boards. Over the decades, they've ceded that, power to others to select board chairs and so on. For our boards. You know, there have been situations that you could say politically connected or politically selected, but I think in the main, when I look across the school boards, in the main, persons have been serving on those boards who are from the community, who have an interest in the school and in serving the school. And we have, over the last 2 years since I've been there, made great efforts to train our board members on their responsibility, on the laws under which they operate and how they should be in school, that they're there for governance, not to be operating at the school level, that when they look at what's being procured at the school, they need to see a process for procurement. Our boards have the awesome responsibility of hiring teachers and going through disciplinary processes for what comes to them. So you can already see that it requires a certain level of skill and so on to operate. So we are embarking on these changes. 2 things that I've put in since I've been there. One, we've created a platform on which boards can upload their minutes now. So we have a sense if boards are meeting. We have
ought to, Minister?
No, they ought to be meeting.
Meaning upload the minutes.
Upload them. We have over 1,000 boards, well over 1,000 boards that operate in Jamaica. So you see, we need something that can give us some information about their meetings, how often, what are the issues that have come before them, and so on. So it can help us to help them to manage. The handbook for boards, we've had it modified, we've had it reviewed, modified, and we're ready to go to print. We'll send it out electronically, but that's there as well. And as I said, we have done more sensitization sessions during the last 2 years than ever in the history of school boards in Jamaica, because we use a virtual platform to meet and to bring this information. 1
minute left in this show, Minister Williams. You've served the Finance Ministry, you've served the Energy Ministry, you're at Education now. I've said to you previously when you first came here on the program that as a successful businesswoman, people would say, well, why is Fayval Williams mad enough to go into representational politics, to be struck with the brickbats, the criticism and everything when trying to do the work Do you regret that? Have you ever in your time regretted the path you chose, abandoning business and making a profit for yourself and your colleagues to come into this field? Unforgiving?
Up to now, George, no. And I would encourage Jamaicans to really step forward and serve. Seriously. It's easy for you to sit on the sidelines. It's easy to criticize. Step forward and serve your country, and you will understand the magnitude of the issues and just how much it takes to make changes in the society. It's not something you can just snap your finger. And look at the Sixth Form Pathways program. Look how much resistance there was to that. Something that was good. That's something that is good for our students. So you can imagine, right? Other areas that need to change. But come forward and serve. I am really, really happy that I've had this privilege to serve at the highest level in our country. And I will continue until until such time. Until such time.
Yes. Hear you on that. Thank you very much for your time today.
You're welcome.
Good. Education Minister Fayval Williams ending the conversation for this week.